All right, so 101. We started off with this idea. The web is not fixed width. A couple more stats for you really quickly here. In the United States, the penetration of desktop and laptop ownership is the same today as it was in 2007. What that means is that all the growth we're seeing is in mobile, you know? I mean, you guys know this, right? But you've probably seen this stat. That orange line represents the growth of mobile browsing. So end of 2013, beginning of 2014, it's predicted that more people will be browsing the web on mobile devices than on your desktop or laptop computer. That's coming really fast. You know, this is triple-digit growth that we're seeing, my clients are seeing year over year from small devices. So this stuff is coming really fast, and really what it means, the truth is that flexibility has to be the new normal for us. And if you've looked at your analytics, you'll realize this too, that people are already trying to browse your sites on these devices, right? And one way to address that we're going to spend the rest of the day talking about is responsive web design. So a quick definition and sort of a little bit of information about where this all started. You guys know Ethan Marcotte coined this phrase in an article that he wrote on A List Apart just over 2 years ago in May. And this is a great article. Who's read this, Responsive Web Design on A List Apart? If you haven't read this, go check it out. I mean, this is like this is where this whole kind of idea started. And Ethan is incredibly eloquent, great writer, just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet online. And he's incredibly, just really defines it very succinctly. He also recently has written a book by the same title, Responsive Web Design Through a Book Apart. It's a nice short read, and it covers all this stuff in pretty good detail. Would certainly recommend that you pick that up as well. The way that Ethan defines responsive is with really, there's three kind of core techniques, and you'll see as we get into this that these are all primarily happening in CSS. So he talks about a fluid foundation, the idea that we need to shift away from pixels in fixing widths in our layouts and start to use a more proportionate thinking. He talks about flexible content. Once the layout systems are flexible, the content we put in those layout systems also has to adjust. And media queries, when we find a place where the design and the layout no longer work well with the content that we've put into them, we can make larger adjustments in our layout through the use of media queries. We're going to talk about all these in detail. So a fluid foundation. Honor the proportions of the design by creating percentage-based grids instead of fixed width pixel-based grids. I want to take this into some code quickly and just get some really simple examples in front of us so we can make sure we all are on the same page here. So this is a really kind of a typical way that you might see grid systems being done these days, using classes on a div and some sort of a class. In this case, I just chose span-1. That indicates that this div is a container that should be 1 column wide. And then span 2 is 2 columns, span 3, 3 columns. So if you can imagine that each of these are, say, 100 pixels, you know, each column is, say, 100 pixels wide. We have a 300 pixel column grid, you know, really simple, right? 300 pixel wide grid. And then in your CSS, you might do something like this. Span 1 has a width of 90 pixels. We're kind of assuming that there's maybe a 10 pixel gutter or something, you know, so we've got, that adds up to 100. For span 2, we would do 190 with that same 10 pixels. Really simple, right? What we need to think about when we shift to this more fluid foundation is how do we convert that into percentages instead? And so in the case where our context is 300 pixels wide and we have a 90 pixel wide element, we want to use a little bit of math, and Ethan kind of walks through all this in his introductory article there. He talks about this idea of target over context. Really, we're just calculating a percentage. And so for our specific case, 90 divided by 300 is 0.3, which is, you know, 30%. 30% for 1 column of a 300 pixel wide grid. So this is theoretical. Let's jump into some code really quickly here. Can you guys see the code all right in the back there? Large enough? Yeah? Okay. So what I've got, this is in that repository, if you want to jump in here, there is a 01-RWD101 folder. And inside that are 5 different HTML files. We're going to start kind of walking through these one at a time. br-1.html is what we're looking at here. If I scroll down to the body of this file, you'll see really all I have is some spans, some divs with a class of span. Just dead simple here, okay? We're just put a tiny bit of text inside each one. If I open this up in the browser, this is kind of what it looks like. Okay? What we're doing here, right in the head of this document, I've got a little bit of CSS. Quick caveat, obviously, you shouldn't be putting all of your CSS in the head of your document. This is just an example, okay? But you can see I've given the body itself a width of 300 pixels. I'm centering it with just a margin. And then each of the spans, span 1, 2, and 3, I've given a min height just so that we can see them. And then floated them left, and they all have a margin right and bottom of 10 pixels, okay? And then span 1 is 90 pixels wide with a background color of red. Span 2, 190, span 3, 290, different colors on the background. And all of that comes together to give us something beautiful like this. So obviously this is sort of our fixed width version of this. What we'd like to do is start to think about how can we adjust this grid, adjust these simple styles in the head of this document to make this percentage-based instead of pixel-based. So I'm going to open up that slide that I just showed you guys that had the target over context math, and I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to actually play with this file itself. You can open this index file up directly in your browser. You don't need to be running localhost or anything. And you can, so just literally just drag it into your browser. It'll open up and go edit that code quickly, modify br-1.html, and try to add some percentages in so that this thing will flex a bit, okay? Anybody have questions on what they're supposed to be doing? Okay. And just holler if you would like to discuss or have a question, okay? You'll want to modify anything that impacts the width.
To use 90 or 100% width for the main div, or the main container.
For body?
Yeah.
Right. So question about what percentage should we be using on the body element? You can kind of pick anything you want. When I do this, I might set it at 90, so there's a little bit of something on either side. But we'll take a look at that too here in just a minute. Good question. If you don't modify the width of the body, then in the end it should sort of look the same if you've done your math right. You know, if you leave that body set to 300 pixels and you adjust all the widths of the columns to be percentage based, they're still inside of a fixed width container, so it should look the same as it does in the fixed width mode, you know. Okay, let's take a quick look here. So the way this is going to run here is that I've got BR1, which is kind of where we started. BR2 is actually a modified version of BR1. And I've gone ahead and made some changes to these widths. So we'll walk through quickly. Again, I haven't changed anything in the body at all, okay? Just made some changes in the style block in the head of that BR-2. So I opted to set the body to a width of 90%. And down here for the margin right, for all three of these elements, I did 10 because this was 10 pixels. 10 over 300 gives us this repeating 3.333. I put in 5 decimal places here. We're going to talk a little bit about rounding and some older browsers and how this impacts layouts. Span 1 was 30%, which we kind of figured out in the actual slide there. Span 2, 63.3 repeating. Again, the math is just in the comment to the right. and span 3, 96.6. Repeating. So now when we take a look at this in a browser, here's our original fixed width layout. And here is the same layout, but using percentages. So you can kind of see this adjusts its width now, right? So now we've modified, we've shifted mentality from this fixed sort of pixel-based layout to start to think about things in proportions. This is what I meant when I said in that first slide, to honor the proportions of the design, okay? And one thing that actually you asked, what's your name?
Ron.
Ron was asking earlier about what should we set the width of the body to. Well, in a case where I'm actually modifying a fixed width design to make it percentage based, a lot of times I'll leave a wrapper, a container set to fixed width just to be able to sort of, you know, see did my math work out right. So if I switch this back to 300 pixels, okay, I'm in BR2, if I do that and refresh and then sort of switch between these two, you'll see there's slight difference here, but generally this is very, very close to what the original was, okay? So that's one little kind of technique you can use just to make sure that your math actually worked out right. And you could do this, you know, this could be any percentage. So if I choose 50%, you know, it'll basically leave 25% on either side of that column. So again, very simple. So let's see here.
The 300 came from the original body size, correct?
Yeah, so in the context of a 300 pixel wide grid, each column is 100 pixels. So what we need to do is figure out what percentage is 100 of the 300 so that it can extend beyond once our container changes its width.